Thanks, Nate, for that introduction. It's tremendous to be here, and thank you for attending. We have a panel going here today, great experts here to talk about trends in the industry. As you know, alternative products, right? So we'll be kind of talking at a broader, higher level, kind of frame up, right, what it is we're seeing. Quick word of introduction. You heard I'm Mike Luce, president, co-founder of High Yield Insights. High Yield Insights is a US-based company. We're focused on cannabis consumer trends and cannabis consumer insights. I co-founded High Yield 2018, a background in market research, places like IRI, Mintel. Our team is really focused on how to understand where the market's going today and how potential consumers are going to add to the growth within the cannabis space. I'll turn it over to Don. Don, if you want to say a few words.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everybody. Don Burke. I'm with Management Science Associates. I'm up here today because we track what happens at retail, and typically in the conventional classes of trade, such as convenience, drug, grocery, mass merchandiser, the traditional classes of trade. So I will be talking about what is happening today in alternative products that we're seeing that is being carried by these classes of trade. We track about 300 stores across the US. We have nearly census level data on the convenience channel, which is very important to this category. And we track all the other classes of trade as well. So I'll give you some perspective on what we're seeing and what we're seeing in terms of alternative products in those classes of trade.
Thanks, Don. Hi, my name is Nate Erskine. I am the head of market insights for CBD Intel. CBD Intel is a premium market intelligence firm based out of Barcelona, Spain. We focus on the CBD industry. We also do other channels such as e-cigarettes and platforms intelligence as well. We're a team of 50, and we have premium market, regulatory, legal tracking, and bespoke data and consulting services for the CBD industry. So we're here today to bring my expertise just around Europe, the US, again, just to generally discuss what trends we're seeing around CBD and the alternative products as well. Hopefully you all got that. It's been a while since we've been at these shows, so it's very nice to be here in person today after being behind screens for the last couple of years, so nice to be here.
And it's great to see people here, right? It's tremendous. So I thought if I could just get things started here a little bit, I think we're going to have a lively discussion. We're hoping to leave about 5-10 minutes toward the end. Welcome questions from the audience. So if something comes up, please give it a little mental note. And then Nate, I believe, will be Nick will be passing around the microphone. So let me, if I could, have Don and Nate speak to some of the broader framework that we're seeing, just to get us started. That might be helpful to give into a bit of the state of the industry, if you would.
Makes sense. I might. All right. Can everybody hear okay? Are we okay? All right. So I'm just going to give you an idea as to what's been happening, not only to alternative products, but CBD, just a general feel for the market trends. And one of the interesting things that I want to bring up is an event that happened that devastated CBD sales in the traditional classes of trade. And that was at the end of 2019. Maybe many of you will remember the illegal THC vaping crisis, all illegal product. But I will tell you, and I think most people in the industry didn't realize this, it had a significant impact on sales of not only CBD, but all of the alternative products. And when we track crises of this nature, it typically takes about a year to a year and a half before consumers forget that crisis. So when that crisis occurred, what we saw is almost immediately sales of CBD and other products, other alternative products, dropped off completely. And what happened, consumers became very afraid. And they were afraid of ingesting anything that was different or they weren't familiar with. It turned them off. Vape was killed at that point. CBD vape as well as nicotine vape, but it dropped off. I just want to tell you some good news as well. Right now, the past 2 quarters, we are beginning to see a return of that. And CBD sales now in the traditional classes of trade are picking back up. Vape is picking back up, so consumers are forgetting. But what was so interesting during that time period, and I'll just real quickly say this, while we saw all of the ingestibles and the vape product for CBD and other items go down, what did consumers turn to who wanted them? The topicals. So topicals, so they were comfortable putting it on their body, but they were not comfortable ingesting it. And that was one of the biggest factors on this total industry. Nate, maybe you have something you can add.
Absolutely, yes. Really interesting insight there from the, from a very specific channel within the industry. What we've seen is obviously, pandemic has been terrible for a lot of businesses, not just CBD. But where are we in terms of CBD today? So CBD has done incredibly well, I think, right? It's come up as an alternative product, an illegal product with a lot of stigma surrounding it. And it's now almost $1 billion industry in the US. Obviously that market size figure will be contested around the place. We think it's certainly about $1 billion for this year. And it's made its way into a number of different channels as well. So now it's in mass retail, it's in your CVS's, your big boxes, it's in Walmart. Everyone and their granny and their dog are now using CBD. So I think that just is a statement of the power of this type of product and where it's come and to be able to weather this storm that was COVID and also on the back of the Valley crisis that Don just mentioned as well. And outside of the retail convenience store types of channels, it is really booming. And the product types that are going through there, they're now CBD, but now you'll see the larger companies start to move away from that a little bit into alternative products. It's kind of finding its feet. Where does CBD sit now? Outside of a medicinal product, which will always be medicinal, and outside of the recreational cannabis side, which is the THC, or now we're seeing a lot of the Delta 8 coming up, which we're going to touch on throughout this conversation as well. But I think that really is a testament to where CBD is generally, globally as a CBD position, and then where the alternative products are now coming up, which are either associated with CBD or other types of products ingredients have been identified that are now hot topics that can then kind of ride the tails of CBD into these channels.
Yeah, and I guess the one add-on I'd tack on to that would be certainly what we have seen from a consumer trend perspective is a faster than typical acceleration in CBD's function as a trailblazer, right? It is not unique in and of itself because it lives within this very broad series of macro trends, plant-based, alternative health and wellness solutions, departing from and seeking other solutions besides prescription medicine. And in so doing, what we have seen is that then opens the consumer's mindset, both from a destigmatization perspective, a better understanding as to the sourcing of CBD, if you will, various spaces within cannabis broadly, so that there's even less today of that confusion in most parts of the states, at least, between, well, what is CBD, what is hemp, what is marijuana, to where now really has opened the door to a lot of what you see just looking around. I mean, just there over your shoulders there, CBDA, CBG, CBN, and the word of mouth, and in our work at least, is really the critical bit, that you have early adopters that are now in CBD further up this adoption curve and excited about telling their friends, family, message boards, and that has created this openness then, not only in talking about it and worrying less about the reaction because the familiarity is there, but creating that openness in the mind of even consumers that aren't maybe today active in cannabis at all, in CBD at all. We found that there's just a lot of upside, even in categories like supplements that you might otherwise consider to be fairly saturated. And there is still quite a bit of adoption that's yet to go on. So I think in that way, CBD functions not necessarily entirely uniquely in the retail space, both in specialty channels, also in mass space. But it definitely is something then that has created opportunities for a much larger market. So let's pivot a bit and talk about what are our thoughts, being in the alternative products panel, what are our thoughts about active ingredients, right? So let's talk a little bit about functional ingredients. We heard then the state of the play a bit about CBD itself. Don, if you want to speak to some of the things that you're seeing.
Sure, yeah. I'll get started and tell. and tell you what we're sort of seeing again in the traditional classes of trade. So CBD, as I mentioned, is starting to pick back up, and so sales are increasing. And I'm doing a presentation tomorrow. I can show you more detail on that. But here's what else we're seeing now in terms of alternative products. CBG is coming on very strongly right now. And in fact, I have been surprised at the amount of sales that I'm seeing behind CBG as compared to CBD. So CBG is coming on very strongly. Kratom is coming on not quite as big as CBG, but is also coming on fairly strongly. And in fact, it had the strongest growth rate in the most recent third quarter of this year as compared to any other product in this category. So Kratom is something that is really going strong. You know, we looked at Delta 8 and Delta 10. I will tell you right now, traditionally, and this is mostly convenience, but I also have tobacco outlets, newsstands, transit locations in this database I'm looking at. Delta 8 was stronger than Delta 10, but still small. So Delta 8 was small. I saw almost no Delta 10 within that. We were asked about mushrooms. We just had a gentleman speak on that. I saw no mushrooms in the traditional class of trade. Interestingly, vape is coming back. And so CBD, CBG vape coming back very strongly, very surprising, but very strongly. Most retailers don't realize that yet. They're coming back very strongly within this category. So that gives you a feel for the type of ingredients or items that we see right now that are beginning to sell very well. Nate, maybe you have something to add to that, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. I would agree. So from my perspective, a lot of the top online retailers in all of the major markets. And what we're seeing is that the adoption of CBD is getting across the board, right? So it's not just the specialists, direct to consumers, the kind of head shops, smoke shops. It's everywhere now. And now we're starting to see those alternative trends come up through those retailers as well. It's a lot slower, I think, than what Don's seeing, just because of the channel type and the risk averseness that these larger retailers will have to those alternative products. Specifically Delta 8, obviously with the regulatory environment, and then minor cannabinoids, they don't really know enough about them. A lot of our clients are saying, well, hang on, we're having enough of a time educating, potential buyers around CBD alone. They don't understand CBG, CBC, THCV, and all of the minor cannabinoids. There's too much at the moment. And they also look for scientific backing as well, which just isn't quite there. So they're taking on a lot of risk, which is good. They're engaging, which is a positive sign. We're seeing CBG coming up for sure. That's the next one. CBG was always the kind of the better looking brother, after CBD came onto the market, and it was always being pushed in a way. And I think it's a market-driven market as well in terms of the price of CBG was prohibitive. Now it's come down a lot, so it's able to be put into these products. From the cannabinoid perspective, we're seeing CBC, CBN in the US, obviously. In European markets, CBN is actually illegal in some countries because it's considered psychoactive. And then I would say that outside of those cannabinoids, or what I like to say, the cannabis-related or derived ingredients, we're seeing mushrooms, as the previous talk here was on, and we're now seeing a lot of that coming into the industry, especially with CBD. My feeling on the matter is that CBD as a standalone ingredient has kind of had its time in the limelight. Everyone kind of knows, okay, CBD, it's on its own, it will do X. But now the innovation in the category is towards how do we put that with other ingredients? How do we market that differently? And that's coming in with anything from multivitamins encroaching on another market, or taking some of these new ingredients such as mushrooms, extracts, other adaptogenics and functionals, and incorporating those into the blend to reposition themselves as something different in the market. And I think that's taking that from the wider CBD grown-up industry, from all of these bubbling, emerging trends at the moment. That is my one lesson that I probably take away from this is that you have to go slow. Convenience stores are probably going to, and fast CBD retail are probably going to take more of a risk on these products to begin with. But to truly get it scaled into the mass market, you've really got to think about, what that ingredient is, the regulatory environment, and what the appetite for risk that your potential buyers might have.
So, one comment along those lines, just sticking with the ingredients theme, really, and also tying back to macro trends, the idea of functional superfoods, super ingredients here in the States is not new, right? If you can think back to acai, resveratrol, these others that have had their moment in the sun, but now I think that CBD has an opportunity, and in fact, most second generation, if you want to call them, cannabinoids have this opportunity where mainstream consumers are starting to see from big name brands new styles of functional beverages. I just jotted down a few here, some of which you may have heard. Even AB InBev brought a functional beverage. It's a vitamin D drink onto their distributors. Molson Coors has been active in seltzers with probiotics. They also own a brand, Golden Wing, which is grain-based protein. They're also in Zoa, which is and we heard about this from attendees. Some of you may have seen the survey from us asking what you'd be interested in. One of those near the top was energy drinks. I would hear that not necessarily as energy drinks, but as functional beverages, right? And what we're seeing then in functional beverages specifically, just to stick with that for a second, beyond just the energy alternative sources of protein, right? We've got oat, almond, grain-based, amino acids, electrolytes, nootropics, all of which I think play very nicely next to cannabinoid inputs, be it CBD or a range of those other more emerging or second generation cannabinoids. So I think that point of that thread around ingredients that CBD plays a role in, and if you will, all hemp-derived compounds, really can create opportunity to latch on, again, to this macro trend that consumers are seeing, and big money brands are already behind. So having touched then on ingredients, maybe we could talk a little bit about what sort of formats are we seeing? Literally product types, a little bit less about what goes into it, a little bit more about where we're seeing new trends and new introductions, promising opportunities within the actual format of the product itself. I don't know, Don, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting ways that we look at this is because of the tobacco consumer. And the reason I bring up the tobacco consumer is that the tobacco consumer is far more likely to be a consumer of CBD than the general population. So one of the suggestions we always make when we talk to CBD manufacturers is to look at the product forms that are growing in the tobacco category, because this is very likely to be your consumer. So one of the very top forms that is working right now in the tobacco category is what's called modern oral or tobacco-derived products. It's the pouch item that you can place in your mouth to get the nicotine that you would want to consume as a tobacco consumer. And that is one of the most popular forms. So if I look at the kind of forms that I were looking at in terms of alternative products for this category, I would certainly be looking at the pouch as a form of that. Another form that is growing within the tobacco category is what is called moist snuff. It's the loose stuff that you put inside your mouth. Again, just going inside the mouth. And Cannabis, if you've heard of that as a product, I think all of you probably have, is a strong alternative product today and growing very quickly within the category. So that's another tobacco form that the CBD consumer and alternative product CBD consumer is adjusting to and moving to. And so I would definitely look at what's happening in that category. Now, having mentioned pouches and then having mentioned moist snuff, vape is also getting big again, and in fact, one of the fastest growing categories in both tobacco and CBD most recently. So look at vape as well. And the last one I'll mention, and this is nothing new to any of you, gummies are the #1 selling form of CBD. Most of you know that. That's also a format, a product form that always should be explored. But Nate, maybe you can add something to this.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating that Don's seeing that from the tobacco perspective as well, which, a lot of lessons can be taken from. And I think there it's going from, we've seen the evolution, and Don will maybe, comment on this a bit as well, from, traditional cigarettes. Then it's gone to a reduced risk product of, smokeless tobacco, heated tobacco. Now it's moving even further beyond that, looking at some some other, cultural uses like the what do you call it, the wet snus and the pouches. That a lot of Scandinavian countries, that's been big for a long time. And I see that as a general trend of the consumer going, towards a more healthy-based product. Not just a healthy-based product, but also easier to dose, and something that's just generally more accepted by the consumer. You walk into a vape shop, if you're, a 95-year-old or a 90-year-old looking to try and use CBD for pain purposes, you're going to walk out straight away, right? You're going to be put off by the devices, by some of the branding, etc. A lot of the mass market are used to being able to take a pill or a capsule or something like that with a dose that actually works, and they're used to that. So I think that's why we're seeing the gummies, particularly in the US, because that's been a theme for other categories as well down the line. It's less so in Europe. But we are seeing less vape actually in terms of our research. So across the US, vape carts are still of very much interest, but e-liquids and the traditional vaping nicotine category, we're actually seeing a disengagement with a lot of vape retailers. They adopted CBD to begin with and various other cannabinoids, and now they're starting to move away from it. And I think that really just hammers down the dichotomy between CBD and vaping, as a health proposition. What else are we seeing in the market? We're in formats wise. We're seeing a lot of focus placed on just getting your format right. It's not really about innovation now. It's about keeping it simple and getting it right. So how can you make it consistent? How can you make the dose repeatable? How can you make that not leak? Getting that into the consumers and making sure that they understand that that's something that they're willing to use and repeat on a weekly, daily basis. Real innovation aspects, we're still seeing a lot of strange things coming through in terms of CBD pillowcases, all that kind of weird stuff. But really at the core and heart of it, it's CBD tinctures, it's CBD gummies, and it's topicals and cosmetics as well.
Let me just round off that. I know we have one fun question we want to get to if we can, but let me just speak to a few things on the format side, and really along 2 points. So I mentioned we're cannabis consumer trends tracking, cannabis consumer insights. One thing that we found in some recent work that we did might challenge a little bit of your thinking. CBD beverages, cannabinoid-infused beverages, are hot, but you may be thinking of it as, been there, done that. If we want to get into a new space and a new form factor, maybe we want to look elsewhere. I would caution you to say, take a fresh look at it. What we did is we've done some studies year over year on CBD consumers and those that are interested in CBD, but for whatever reason are sitting on the sidelines. And specific to beverages, when we asked in Q4 of 2019, we found of CBD current consumers, only 17% were active in beverages. We came back, asked that same question Q4 of last year, 29% were in beverages. So if you imagine, there's still tremendous headroom. Of those that expressed interest in CBD categories that they were not yet in, beverages was still top of the list. 37% of people came back, current CBD users, said, I'm not in beverages today, but I'd love to try it out. I have a plan to go sample it and see what it's like. And then maybe lastly, just to throw another stat out there, well, we saw that there's a huge, as I mentioned earlier, portion of the country that is interested in the CBD piece. And of those, 70% said we're interested in beverages and other minor cannabinoids. And then maybe lastly, on the multifunction point, before we turn it over to the attendees, I'll use a little bit of a prop here because we do track the THC side of the market. This is a brand 1906, huge out west. Great market to monitor if you're thinking about trends in general, even if you're not touching THC per se. These are capsules, low dose, also a key trend to look at. 2.5 milligrams of THC, 2.5 milligrams of CBD, marketed around not any sort of esoteric function, but this is genius, literally, right? They have others, bliss, love is another. So that also speaks to something to consider, less so talking about what's in this, but more so talking about what experience is this going to deliver for consumers. So we're going to skip our $1 million literally question and let us just turn it over to you. We want to make sure we give you guys a little bit of airtime. Although we could certainly keep talking.
He's asked his question.
Thank you. This question's for all three of you, even though it alludes to something Dawn said earlier. With the vaping crisis that we had, and we saw that the move away from that in the market, has that opened up opportunities for alternative methods of delivery that are maybe novel, besides your topicals, your beverages, your gummies? So, for instance, let's go there. For instance, suppositories. Would that be? Has it opened up a market for that?
So in the traditional class of trade, we're not seeing it, and really, you have to educate consumers before they will understand that product form. We're not seeing it yet today. I will tell you one encouraging thing: we do track Google searches, and Google searches in this category is up. So consumers are, again, it went down during the pandemic. So consumers are, again, looking for information in this category. So you could be right. If you get it out there and you educate consumers, I think there's opportunity for it, but we're not seeing it yet.
Yeah, there's one thing I'll comment on, and look, it is what it is. Women are a huge part of the CBD market. We know this, right? CBD has tremendous potential and is delivering against the unique sorts of health concerns, wellness concerns that women have. There are numerous brands now that are actually delivering against that by formulating and marketing product. And I'm not talking about pink jars and actually in a very conscientious way. And you mentioned suppositories. Vaginal products are actually something that we're seeing as a very small niche product, but from a biological perspective, that's one of the richest areas that's prepared to absorb CBD into your body, and properly, I think, positioned, properly formulated, with, again, that wellness focus, that conscientious approach, and the understanding that women, particularly maybe older women in some cases, have needs that they're not happy with in terms of what's on the market. Or if their mindset is, I'm seeking alternative solutions, I'm seeking plant-based, holistic solutions. That's actually something we've seen and we're paying a lot of attention to.
If I can just continue on there, sorry. So yeah, we're seeing that as well. You know, female products in the marketplace, we're seeing a couple of brands, but actually more so just in the actual dynamics of the market. So we're seeing more investor interest around that kind of category. Obviously because of what Mike said about, you know, the movement and the power behind that, and, you know, the spend that's behind that. Just to touch on your point about the Valley crisis, I think that there is an opening, and I think it's in inhalers. So there's been a couple of products that have hit the market. I think they were a little bit before their time. A couple of the brands here, I think one of them for sure had one out. But we've had a lot of interest around this format. And I think it is one to watch because of the evolution of the consumer looking for something more healthy, right? And also the bioavailability aspect and the onset time aspect. So it kind of hits the trifecta, right? Because it wants to be a vape, but it's healthy, okay? And we're seeing formats now that are being reversed out of medicinal and you know, applications, which I think have got vast potential. You know, we're talking about potential little capsules which you'll put into a dosed metering device, which allows you to switch various different formulations between each use. Hook that up with the technology aspect, you know, apps tracking, Bluetooth enabled tracking, you know, devices on the consumption side. I think that's a very interesting area.
Other questions? We maybe have time for one question? One question.
I'm in the CBD pet space. What kind of trends do you see happening in that, or do you guys track that at all?
It's probably very prevalent in the...
Yeah, really good question. So we do track that, and I'll actually show something on that tomorrow. But in terms of pet, we find that about 7% of consumers are interested in buying a product for their pet. Now, if you look at that, that can be a sizable market, because if you look at tobacco business, only 14% of consumers smoke or use a tobacco item. Now we're looking at 7% of people who will consider purchasing CBD for their pet. It actually could be a fairly sizable market, so we are seeing a lot of interest in that.
All right, we have to wrap up. Thanks so much. We're happy to take any questions or discussions offline. Thanks for the organizers for giving us the platform and the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, everyone.